Hey there, Marcus Hutzel here, and in this video I wanted to try to walk you quickly through my dual camera recording setup for live events. Now, as a project manager, I don't always get to be in the driver's seat and operating this equipment. Most of the time I'm managing a crew doing all this. But for this specific event, I do get to get in there and operate this equipment and be an audio and video nerd, which I am. So I wanted to walk you through this setup and keep one very important thing in mind when I'm walking you through all of this, and that is backups. Everything on this rig has a backup of some sort, be it a power backup and or a recording backup, because if something fails, I want another option, be it live in the room or in post when I'm editing. However, there is a second point to this entire setup, and that is that I've built this rig out to do a live cut of the show with one person operating one camera while we have a second camera here fixed. And that is to give the client a very quick handoff at the end of the show of a mostly polished and ready to go recording without having to do many edits. However, as I said, everything has a backup, and in this system, I have the ability in post to go back and edit my live recording, and I'll get into exactly how I'm doing that. So let's just walk through it real quick. All right, so this may be a little bit hard to see with the really wildly colored carpet in the background, but basically I have a 2-camera setup. Over on the left is camera 1, and that is a fixed camera mostly for the show. It's a wide shot of the entire room, while camera 2 is my main camera that I'm operating and following talent up there on the stage. But I'm also panning and zooming into any attendees that might be over in these seats as they ask and answer any questions. So I've got to be ready for those scenarios with camera 2. Now, the reason I have camera 1 over here is kind of the lock shot is because it is on my left as I'm operating this equipment. I'm standing here, so I figure camera 1 should be left, camera 2 would be the right, and that makes it easier when I'm doing the live switching because camera 1 is on that side of the switcher and camera 2 is the next button over. So camera 1, camera 2, fixed camera, and follow shot with this camera number 2. Now, sometimes I will input a third camera. On this specific show, I'm testing out this little OBSBot tail air camera to see how it does in tracking. It's been okay, but I'm not really using it for the live cut of the show. Sometimes camera 3 will be a kind of medium shot of the stage that is also fixed so that I have something to cut to later on if I make a mistake when I'm operating camera 2 here. So camera 3 is optional in this scenario. Now, I can have up to 4 inputs on my recorder down here, and input number 4 is not a camera, it's actually the output from that Vibe S1 smart whiteboard at the front of the room. I'm taking the video output of that smart whiteboard as the talent writes on it, and I'm recording that right down here on input 4. So I've got camera 1, camera 2, camera 3 optional, and camera 4, which is the output of the smart whiteboard. Which brings us to the main recording station, which is built around an ATEM SDI Pro ISO. And I'm using this switcher because it's small, it has 4 inputs, but really the main reason I went with this version over the HDMI version is that the ATEM SDI Pro ISO gives you 2 video outputs on the back, whereas the HDMI only versions of this switcher only give you a single HDMI output. But I wanted 2 video outputs because I need the multi-view here primarily on the monitor inside the case, but I also wanted to be able to send a clean program feed outside of this case to record it externally, and I'm doing that here on the Atmos Shogun. And I get not only the program cut recording, but I get the ISO files of each of those cameras that I have input, so I can go back and edit my recording later or just hand off any one of the ISO files to the client in case they just wanted camera 1, for example. Now, I'm not going to go into every detail of this case, but basically it's the ATEM SDI Pro ISO. I have a Raspberry Pi computer built into the case, and I needed that because there are some specific functions of the ATEM that you can't do with the buttons on the ATEM. And so I have the Raspberry Pi running Companion, and then I can control more aspects of the ATEM that I can't do with the buttons with the Stream Deck, but I do not have to have a laptop running Companion because the Raspberry Pi, which is again installed underneath this Stream Deck in this case, is running Companion, and this just makes this entire setup much more compact and portable. I have a router in here, I have a network switch underneath there as well, so when I'm done with the show I can basically just turn everything off, close the case, take it off the stand it's on, and it's pretty much all packed up and ready to go. Now, since Companion is running inside the Raspberry Pi in the box, I can't edit what the buttons do here at this station. So I usually have another table, or in this case, a tripod stand where my laptop sits, and I can copy files during lunch breaks. Or if I need to, I can pull up Companion on a web browser that is looking at Companion running from there. So the laptop here is not running Companion, it can just access it and make changes, and that way I can take my laptop away like it is now, and yet my Stream Deck still controls everything with the ATEM that I need it to do. But anyway, moving on, let's go to camera 2. I'm using a Sony FX30. I'm actually using two Sony FX30s, one for camera 2, and there's my other Sony FX30 for camera 1. Now, I'm using Sony FX30s for a couple of reasons. Number one, they are small and portable, and I can pack them down and put them in my suitcase and take them on the airplane with me. I don't have to have this big case with a camcorder in it. And that leads to point number two, is that the Sony FX30 has an APS-C sensor. It's a larger sensor than something like a camcorder, and given the same light in the room, this camera is going to have a cleaner image. So those are two reasons I chose the Sony FX30, the portability and the better overall image quality generally than a lot of camcorders. However, the Sony FX30 is a DSLR style video camera. It is video centric, it is primarily a video camera, but I needed to turn it into more of an ENG style camera to where I could pan and zoom it with something down here versus having to reach up and zoom the lens manually or focus the lens manually. I needed good autofocus, so I guess that's reason number 3 for choosing the Sony FX30, because I can use the face detect autofocus. It finds the talent and just kind of sticks on them the entire time. But in addition to having good face detection autofocus on the camera itself, I'm also using the Atomos Shinobi 2 5-inch video monitor, because the Atomos Shinobi 2 has the ability to communicate with the FX30, and that means I can use the Shinobi 2 monitor and actually focus on something else using the monitor. So if the camera grabs the wrong face in the crowd, I can just touch something or someone else's face on the monitor itself, and that will easily switch focus to the other subject. So focusing was taken care of, but I needed the ability to stand here with one hand and move this camera around, pan it, tilt it, and zoom in. And I'm doing that with this third-party zoom controller. I have zoom controls right there. I can start and stop recording and do a couple of other things, but I pretty much just use the zoom rocker. It's USB out and goes up and around and plugs into one of the camera's USB ports right there. But keep in mind, to be able to use this zoom controller, your lens has to be a power zoom lens. You can't just use any lens. It can't be a manual zoom lens. So this is the Sony 18-105 power zoom. It gives me an equivalent field of view of about 25 millimeters to 157. So in rooms this size, which are kind of small, it's about 50 feet by 50 feet. And that's about the maximum size room or distance from camera to stage that I can go and still get a tight shot with this lens. If the stage were any further away, I would have to choose a different lens and probably a different camera, but the Sony 18-105 power zoom works really well with the FX30 and my zoom controller. And now you can see I can pan, tilt, and the camera is zooming while I'm using the zoom controller right there, and that ties up my right hand, which then leaves my left hand available to basically switch the show. I can hit camera 1 and then hit auto. Camera 2 is already in preview, and I've actually got this macro built right here on the Stream Deck to where I can punch that. It puts the whiteboard in preview with the picture-in-picture, and then I hit auto, and that puts the output of the whiteboard up with a little picture-in-picture of camera 2, and then I can just cut back to any of the other cameras when I'm ready to have another full screen view. So that's what my left hand is doing. It's basically operating the ATEM and of course punching any of the extra buttons that I programmed in the Stream Deck. Back to camera 1 real quick, I have a different lens on camera 1. It is also a power zoom lens, and that is the Sony 10-20 millimeter f4 power zoom. So that gives me about an equivalent of a 15 millimeter to about a 35 millimeter if I needed to go in a little bit tighter. Then I do have another zoom controller hooked up there in case I do want to move this camera and maybe zoom that camera in a little bit, but I basically leave it at 10 millimeters most of the time so I can get that nice wide shot of the room. Now, I said in the beginning, my system here is built around having a backup for everything. So this is my primary recording. I've got backup recording on camera, and I've got another backup recording on that camera. I'm recording internally to the SD cards. However, I also want a backup recording of the program view just in case the ATEM glitches out and stops recording. If I have a problem with the hard drive and the ATEM stops, most of the time when I've seen that happen, if the ATEM stops recording, it will still pass signal and it will still actually do your cuts and send that signal out. So over here to the right, I'm using an Atomos Shogun. So I'm taking the program out of the ATEM and I'm sending that over here to the Shogun. And on the Shogun, I'm recording exactly what's coming out of the ATEM, but only that program view. You can see right here, this monitor is the multi-view, but that monitor is just the program. So if I switch to, let's say, camera 4, watch the Shogun over there, it will go. So I hit record there. And again, if this fails, but still stays on and passes signal, then I get a backup program recording right there, ready to go after the show. But if all goes well, I won't even need that and I'll delete it when the show's done, as long as this stayed running and recorded the entire show. And then I'm taking the HDMI output of the FX30 and I'm coming over to this Blackmagic HDMI to SDI converter. First, it's actually a bi-directional converter. And when I go in with HDMI, I actually get the HDMI out and I get the SDI out. The HDMI out is going over to my little Atomos Shinobi right here, so I have a dedicated view of just camera 2, and the SDI out is going down and around and over to the rear of this case, which gives me the SDI input into the ATEM here. And the same thing is happening with camera 1 here. I'm taking the HDMI out, going to a converter. You can see the input right there. I'm not using the HDMI out here, but I am using the SDI out to go over to the input of the ATEM. And I'm converting these cameras to SDI because this is an ATEM SDI Pro ISO. It does not have HDMI input, so I needed to convert these cameras to SDI because these cameras do not have SDI outputs. So that was a simple conversion and gives me the split HDMI output on each if I need it, which again, I am using the HDMI output here to go to the monitor, and I'm using the SDI out again to go to the input of my little recording box. And real quick, for my backup power, I have a battery in the camera that is in the camera at all times, but I'm feeding auxiliary power from this battery into the camera. So the camera basically uses the external battery first, and then if this runs out, it will then default to using the battery in the camera. And that's my backup. So if this battery fails or just drains completely, the camera still has a battery in it. However, I'm feeding live input power into this battery from a USB power brick right there. So even my battery has a backup power solution coming from this USB brick down here. And the same thing is going on camera 1. I have another battery feeding up to the camera. The camera has its own battery inside the battery compartment. The batteries on both camera 1 and camera 2 are also powering the Blackmagic bidirectional converters. And you can see here, the battery on camera 1 is also being fed input power from this. So these USB bricks are plugged into a standard wall outlet that's coming across the floor right there. And then I use the USB outputs to power multiple devices. And the reason I'm doing it this way is that if someone trips over my cable over at the wall over there that I don't have access to during the show, it won't matter because I can pull this and nothing turns off. Everything is still running. It just doesn't have wall power anymore, and now we're operating completely on batteries. But the idea is that I would notice that it's unplugged from somewhere and be able to fix that power later in the day, but I can still run for many, many hours, probably 3 or 4 hours on this without having wall power at all. For my little ATEM mini case, the main power is actually coming from this V-mount battery, but I have live power input into that V-mount battery coming from another USB power delivery brick down here on the bottom of this stand. So this is plugged into the wall as well. It feeds USB power delivery output up to this battery, so I can pull live power from this battery and the case stays on, and now it is operating completely on battery power. So I do have to occasionally keep my eye on the battery percentage on that battery to make sure it's not draining while it's charging, but also just to make sure that my power didn't get unplugged somewhere either down there or from my battery. And if all goes well, it just stays charged all day while it's providing power to my recording case. And I might as well show you the back or the inputs of the case. We have our SDI inputs down here at the bottom. I've got some audio inputs. I've got some SDI outputs. Those are the outputs that feed up to the Atomos Shogun so I can get that backup program recording. So lots of options that I've built into this box to make all of this a little quicker on the setup and give me lots of options for how I want to route things. All right, last but not least, we need to talk about audio because I'm doing something a little different on this show. Number one, I've got an audio operator controlling all of the microphones and the house music. I'm not doing that. I've got someone doing that. However, right down here, I've got a microphone splitter. So I'm taking all the wireless microphones and a couple of outputs from the console, and I'm using the splitter so I can get ISO recordings of each person's individual microphone. Now, if all goes well, I won't need to use them, assuming that the audio operator did a really good job on the show and didn't miss any cues or miss turning a microphone on or off. But in case we did make mistakes here, I have the audio ISOs. Now I'm sending those over to my camera station. We're not recording audio ISOs here. That is an option, and I've done that before. But in this case, I wanted to keep all the audio ISOs over at recording land. So out of the back of the splitter, I'm not going to show you all that cable mess right now, but basically I've got as many as 8 ISO tracks coming down a couple of cables here. And I'm doing that with these analog audio over Ethernet tails. These use shielded Cat6 cable or Ethercon cable to send up to 4 discrete channels of audio down a single cable. Now, these are not converting anything to digital audio. It's just using the copper in the Cat6 cable, just like an XLR snake, but using these tails allows me to keep my cable runs much smaller than a thick XLR snake running across the floor. So I have 2 sets of break-in tails on one side with female XLR connectors. Set number 1 carries audio channels 1 through 4 down one Cat6 cable, and set number 2 carries audio channels 5 through 8 down a second Cat6 cable. And then I have breakout tails on the other end with male XLR connectors, and I run each of those XLR connectors into the individual inputs of my audio field recorder, and now I can have up to 8 discrete channels of audio being recorded a little bit further away from front of house using only 2 shielded Cat6 cables. So my 2 shielded Cat6 cables run across the floor and into the inputs of my Sound Devices MixPre 10 Mark II field recorder. So I'm recording microphone 1, microphone 2, microphone 3, microphone 4, and then I'm getting a program mix on channel 8, which is the exact mix that's being sent to the speakers in the room. So basically I'm using pretty much channel 8 and I'm outputting that from the MixPre 10 up to my main camera. So camera 2 is getting the program audio, and then down at the Blackmagic ATEM, I basically turn on audio for camera 2, and now the ATEM, the program recording, and all the ISO recordings are getting the exact mix that the audio operator is sending me. So my ISO recording is basically purely backup. If all goes well, I shouldn't need to use these individual channels, but I'd rather have them than not, just in case we have any sort of technical issues during the show. And the MixPre 10.2 also is running on dual power, number 1. On the back here, this is a battery pack that holds 8 AA batteries. So there are 8 new AA batteries in there. And then I have a Sony style NPF. This is a small rig version, but it's an NPF style battery that is connected to this plate. This has a 12 volt output via a DC jack, and that is the primary power for the MixPre 10. So the MixPre 10.2 is not plugged into any power coming from a wall. It is operating completely on battery power, but this battery, just like the batteries I have on the cameras, has a power input. So I do have a power input going into this battery coming from this same USB brick. So I've got power input into the battery. I can take that out and the MixPre stays on, and now it's running on just this battery. And when this runs out, it will run on these batteries. So I have kind of a 3-tiered power system. Power coming from the wall into that battery, the battery, and more batteries. Can you tell that I like backup systems? I want everything to work in case of any problems. If something goes wrong, I've got a backup. All right, so that's about as much detail as I want to get in. It's actually a little bit more detail than I plan on doing for this video, but I wanted to show this setup. But I've run this show about 5 times now, and although the basic setup hasn't changed, I've added things to make hopefully set up and tear down quicker and add backup systems so that I just have options to fall back on. And I hope some of this has been educational or entertaining. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next one. And to note, I actually have a backup video recording of this video I'm recording on the GoPro as well. Now granted, you're not gonna be able to see all the detail if this recording fails, but at least I have something. And I also have backup audio. I'm recording on my Rode Wireless Pro. This is recording, and it's also sending audio into the camera, so I've got backups even for a behind the scenes of my station that has more backups. So with that, I guess I'll back up into my hotel room for the night and call it a day. Later.